He was not born a king. He was a farmer's son from the windswept fjords of Scandinavia who taught himself to sail, to raid, to think 3 moves ahead of every enemy he ever faced. His name was Ragnar Lothbrok. And in the 9th century, that name alone was enough to make the most powerful rulers in Europe bolt their doors and pray to a god who would not save them. This is the story of the man who transformed the Vikings from seasonal raiders into conquerors of civilizations. Who attacked Paris twice. Who died in a pit of serpents laughing, yes, laughing, and whose sons unleashed the most devastating invasion England had ever seen. No name in Norse history carries more weight. No story from the Viking Age carries more fire. And it begins, as all great Viking stories begin, with a ship, a horizon, and a man who refused to be afraid of either. What Ragnar understood, and what no Viking before him had fully grasped, was that the great kingdoms of Europe were not impregnable fortresses. They were prizes, available to any man bold enough to reach for them. He reached. And the world was never the same again. The world Ragnar was born into was one of violent competition and breathtaking beauty. Scandinavia in the 8th century was a land of deep forests, frozen fjords, and small farming communities ruled by local chieftains called jarls. Land was scarce. The old inheritance laws meant that younger sons received nothing, no farm, no title, nothing but a sword and their own ambition. The sea, therefore, became both escape route and weapon. The Norse had spent generations perfecting their longships, shallow-drafted vessels that could cross the open Atlantic and yet navigate rivers barely 2 feet deep, appearing in places no one thought ships could reach. The prow hits sand. The ramp drops. Armed warriors pour out before locals even understand what is happening. This was the Viking method: speed, surprise, maximum violence, withdrawal before anyone could organize a defense. Ragnar was born into it. But where every other Viking raider was satisfied with gold and silver and a safe return home, Ragnar asked the question nobody else dared ask. What if we did not go home? The Viking Age is traditionally dated from 793 AD, the year Norse raiders sacked the monastery of Lindisfarne on Holy Island off the northeast coast of England. The monks there had been living in one of the most celebrated centers of Christian scholarship in the world. In one morning, everything changed. The raiders killed some, took others as slaves, carried off the gold and silver treasures, and vanished back into the sea. The shock across Christian Europe was profound. They were not armies. They were apparitions. And this was just the beginning. Ragnar's early life is wrapped in legend so thick that separating the historical man from the mythological hero is almost impossible. What we know is that a Viking chieftain answering his description was raiding the English coast with increasing sophistication through the 820s and 830s. He was not simply raiding. He was selecting targets based on intelligence. He was timing his strikes to avoid coordinated English responses. He was building the kind of reputation that made lesser chieftains want to sail under his banner. The sagas describe him as tall, fair-haired, with eyes the color of ice and a laugh his men could hear over the sound of battle. Whether accurate or invented, the portrait is consistent across sources. He was a man who genuinely loved war, not in the anxious way of someone who needs to prove himself, but in the deep calm way of someone who had found what he was made for. And what he was made for was about to become very much France's problem. Warriors came to him. Not because he was born powerful, he was not, but because following him felt like following something inevitable. He distributed plunder fairly. He kept his promises. He picked his targets with an intelligence that protected his men even as he led them into extraordinary danger. His fleet grew because the word spread across the fjords: sailing with Ragnar meant coming home rich. That reputation was the foundation of everything that followed. In 845 AD, confirmed by multiple Frankish chronicles, Ragnar led a fleet of 120 longships up the Seine River toward Paris. 120 ships. Each longship carried between 40 and 60 warriors. That is somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 armed men, rowing up the Seine, past burning riverside settlements, toward the heart of the Frankish Empire. The city of Charles the Bald, grandson of Charlemagne himself, emperor of half of Europe. Charles made his first catastrophic mistake by splitting his army, placing forces on both banks of the river. Ragnar attacked the smaller force and destroyed it. Then he did something that was not war, it was theater. He hanged 111 prisoners on an island in the Seine in full sight of the army on the opposite bank. 111 bodies swinging in the wind, close enough for the soldiers across the water to see the faces. Charles did not fight. He paid 7,000 pounds of silver. The largest ransom payment in Frankish history. Ragnar sailed home richer than any Viking who had ever lived. But the silver was not the most valuable thing he brought back. He brought back knowledge. The layout of French rivers. Which cities were wealthy and which were defended. That the Frankish military, when surprised and psychologically broken, would pay rather than fight. That information transformed Viking strategy across Scandinavia. Within a generation, every ambitious Jarl was building more ships and planning expeditions based on what Ragnar had proven. The Viking Age shifted gears. And Ragnar had put his hand on the lever. The legend of Ragnar cannot be separated from the legend of his wives. The sagas give him two great ones. First Lagertha, a shield-maiden warrior queen who the sagas say fought beside him in battle before she became his wife. The Norse world, uniquely among medieval cultures, had a tradition of female warriors. Archaeologists have found Viking Age graves of women buried with weapons, armor, and the full honors of a warrior. Lagertha was not merely a saga invention. She was a type the Norse world actually produced. His second wife Aslog was a Volva, a Norse prophetess, a woman of magic and foresight. She bore him the sons who would reshape England. What the sagas understand, even dressed in myth, is that Ragnar was a founder. The violence he unleashed on the British Isles and France was not random destruction. It was the opening phase of a project that his sons would complete. The project of taking not just silver, but land. Not just raiding England, but owning it. Bjorn Ironside, called Ironside because no weapon could pierce him. Ivar the Boneless, a man so brilliant as a tactician that his inability to walk became irrelevant beside his military genius. Hvitserk, Sigurd Snake in the Eye, each one became a Jarl, a king, or a terror in his own right. 5 sons. 5 catastrophes waiting to happen to England. The key that would release them was Ragnar's death. The sagas say Ragnar made his final raid on England with only 2 ships, an act of supreme confidence or spectacular recklessness, and perhaps both. His sons begged him not to go. His wife Aslog prophesied disaster. He went anyway. He was Ragnar Lothbrok. 2 ships were enough. The English were not prepared for what 2 ships containing Ragnar Lothbrok could do. And then the storm came. A great storm destroyed his ships off the English coast. His warriors were killed or scattered. Ragnar, wounded, was captured by the forces of King El of Northumbria, a king who did not fully understand who he had taken prisoner, or perhaps understood entirely and chose theater over wisdom. He chose theater. He would regret it across whatever afterlife awaited him. King El had Ragnar thrown into a pit filled with venomous snakes. Perhaps he thought it was a suitably dramatic end for a man of such dramatic legend. Perhaps he wanted to demonstrate that the great Viking raider died in helpless agony rather than glory. He had miscalculated on both counts. The pit would not contain what Ragnar represented. Nothing would. In the pit, Ragnar sang. He sang a death song, describing his battles, his victories, his life of extraordinary violence and extraordinary joy. The Norse believed that how a man died mattered as much as how he lived. A warrior who died in battle or with courage went to Valhalla, the great mead hall of the gods where warriors feasted and fought until the end of the world. Ragnar was not going to give El the satisfaction of dying badly. His last words, whether historically accurate or poetically invented, they are exactly right, were these. He laughed, and he said, "How the little piglets would grunt if they knew the old boar situation." Meaning, my sons are coming. And when they come, El, nothing will protect you. The snakes bit. Ragnar Lothbrok died in a pit in Northumbria, laughing at the man who killed him, certain of his revenge even as the venom took him. He was, to the end, exactly what the sagas said he was. When the news reached his sons, they did not weep for long. They built ships. They recruited warriors. Every jarl who had ever sailed under Ragnar's banner, every farmer's son who had heard his name and dreamed of glory, every man with a grudge against English kings, they all had somewhere to go now. The great Viking migration was about to begin. And it had a name. The Great Heathen Army. In 865 AD, Ragnar's sons arrived in England with what the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle called the Great Heathen Army. This was not a raid. This was a conquest. Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn, Fitzurk, and Ub landed with thousands of warriors, the largest Viking force England had ever faced, and they did not come for silver. They came for El. Ivar the Boneless was a military genius of the First Order. Unable to walk, he was carried into battle on a shield, and directed operations with a cold precision that the English could not counter. Within 2 years the great heathen army had conquered Northumbria, East Anglia, and much of Mercia. Every English king in the north was either dead, fled, or paying tribute. Ragnar's sons had done in 2 years what their father had spent a lifetime pointing toward. King El was captured alive. His end was the one Ragnar had promised, not random violence but personal reckoning. A father's sons completing what their father's death had made inevitable. The great heathen army did not leave England after the reckoning. They settled. The territory they controlled became the Danelaw, a region of England governed under Norse law, Norse customs, Norse kings. Ragnar's raid had become an empire. The Danelaw transformed England permanently. York became Jorvik, one of the great cities of the Viking world, a cosmopolitan trading hub where Scandinavian merchants sold Arabic silver coins, Byzantine silk, and Irish goods alongside English wool. Archaeologists excavating the Coppergate site in York found workshops producing amber jewelry, leather goods, metalwork, and textiles at an industrial scale. A city connected by trade routes to the Mediterranean and beyond. The Norse impact on England was not just military. It was linguistic. The words sky, leg, knife, husband, window, and hundreds more come directly from Old Norse. It was genetic. Modern DNA studies show substantial Scandinavian ancestry across northern and eastern England. And it was legal. The Norse concept of the thing, a democratic assembly where free men had a voice, influenced the development of English common law in ways that shaped the Magna Carta and everything that came after. Ragnar's legacy was not just conquest. It was civilization. The Danelaw covered roughly half of England. It had its own laws, its own courts, its own kings. It would take Alfred the Great of Wessex, one of the greatest rulers England ever produced, decades of warfare and diplomacy to push it back. And even then, the Norse influence never fully left. The England that emerged from the Viking Age was a different country from the one the Viking Age had found. Ragnar's raid had redrawn a nation. The reach of the Vikings that Ragnar's generation opened up extended far beyond England and France. Norse explorers discovered Iceland around 870 AD, then Greenland in 985, then North America, Vinland, in present-day Newfoundland, around 1000 AD. 500 years before Columbus. They reached Baghdad as traders, selling furs and amber for silver, bringing back coins that have been found in Scandinavian burial mounds by the thousands. They served as the personal bodyguards of Byzantine emperors, the Varangian Guard, the most elite fighting force in the Byzantine world, composed almost entirely of Norse warriors. They left runic graffiti on the walls of the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. They founded Dublin. They established trading posts along the Russian rivers that gave Russia its name, the Rus, from the Norse tribe that settled there. A small cold nation at the edge of the known world had decided the known world was not enough. That decision, more than any single battle or raid, was Ragnar's contribution. He did not just raid. He proved that the world beyond the fjords was available. That the kingdoms of Europe and the trade routes of the East were not closed systems that excluded Norsemen. They were open systems waiting for someone bold enough to enter them. Ragnar kicked the door open. An entire civilization walked through behind him. The question historians argue about, was Ragnar a real person or a composite legend, somewhat misses the point. The Viking Age happened. The Great Heathen Army happened. The transformation of northern England into Norse-speaking, Norse law territory happened. The raids on Paris happened. Something drove all of that. Some individuals possessed the audacity, the vision, the organizational capacity that turned seasonal raiding into organized conquest. The sagas concentrated those qualities into one name and one face. Whether that name belonged to one man or represents the distilled essence of an entire generation of Norse leaders, the story is true in the way the best stories are true, not necessarily in every factual detail, but in what it says about human beings and what they are capable of when they stop accepting limits. The pit could not hold what Ragnar represented. The archaeology cannot contain it either. Every Viking artifact dug from English soil is a piece of the story Ragnar started. He never stopped being true. The Norse warrior who carved his name into the marble of the Hagia Sophia thousands of miles from his fjord home, he was there because Ragnar proved the world was reachable. The traders who brought Arabic silver back to Scandinavian burial mounds were there because Ragnar proved it was worth going. The Normans who conquered England in 1066, Norse descendants who had settled in France, were there because Ragnar proved that landing on foreign shores and staying was possible. His legacy traveled further than he ever did. Ragnar's sons spread his legacy across the known world. Bjorn Ironside raided the Mediterranean, striking Spain, North Africa, and Italy in a campaign of extraordinary ambition. He allegedly attacked what he believed was Rome. It was actually the Italian city of Luna, but the audacity was pure Ragnar. Ivar the Boneless continued his campaigns in Ireland and Scotland after the Great Heathen Army's English campaigns, building a Norse empire that stretched across the Irish Sea. The ultimate expression of Ragnar's legacy came in 1066, 200 years after his death. William the Conqueror, who defeated the last Anglo-Saxon king at Hastings and became King of England, was himself a Norse descendant. His great-great-great-grandfather was Rollo, a Viking chieftain who had settled in northern France, in the territory that became Normandy, named for the Northmen who settled it. The Viking who took Paris in 845 helped set in motion the chain of events that put a Norse-descended king on England's throne in 1066. Ragnar's raid had not just become an empire. It had become a dynasty. In Scandinavia today, Ragnar Lothbrok is not just a historical figure. He is a cultural identity, the embodiment of Norse ambition, Norse courage, and Norse refusal to accept the boundaries the world tried to impose. Every retelling of his story finds something new in it. The farmer's son who built an empire from audacity alone. The king who laughed in the face of execution. The father whose death launched the conquest of England. 800 years after the last Viking kingdom fell, the dragon prows are still in the imagination. Cutting through grey ocean mist toward a horizon that could hold anything. Ragnar Lothbrok's story has never stopped being told. It has been retold in Icelandic sagas, in Danish chronicles, in English historical records written by people terrified of him, in novels, in television series watched by millions. Each retelling finds something new: the son who refused to accept his father's death, the king who laughed in the face of execution, the farmer's son who built an empire from ambition and audacity alone. The Danelaw shaped England's language, law, and genetics. The Norse settlements shaped Iceland, Ireland, Russia, and Normandy. The trading routes shaped the medieval economy of the known world. All of it traces back to the generation Ragnar led, the generation that looked at the horizon and decided it was not a boundary but an invitation. Ragnar Lothbrok. Farmer's son. Raider. King. The man who proved that the world belonged to those with the courage to take it. He died laughing in a pit of serpents, certain his sons would finish what he started. They did. The world is still living with the consequences. The drum beats. The oars dip. The sea is ahead. And somewhere in the mist, it is still possible to hear a man laughing, absolutely certain, even now, that he has already won.